So good afternoon, Year 12s. Mr. Davidson and I thought it would be a good idea to give you a sort of a talk through of this research project, as it's a bit of an extended piece of work, and the instructions, as clear as they might seem to some people, they might need a bit of clarification for others. So I'm just going to run you through the project, a few of the sort of details about it, and go over the instructions and hopefully give a bit more clarification as to what we expect you to do in your project. So the aim of this project is to link together as much of the learning as possible from the last 6 weeks or so since you've been doing your home learning. So we appreciate that each week's work might have seemed fairly independent of each other, and you might not have been able to make the links between different lessons and different weeks that we would usually be sort of making, or trying our best to make for you in class. So the aim of this project is to bring together your learning from the last few weeks on the topic of the future of food, and to hopefully create a more sort of cohesive view of the different areas that you've been studying over the last few weeks. And by doing that, we'll hope to sort of piece together a bit of a flow, if you like, of how these issues connect to each other. So that's the aim of this project, and we've decided to frame it as though you are a decision maker or reporting to a decision maker, to sort of really give you a sense of how these issues play out and are dealt with in real time. You'll see from some of the sources that we've supplied to you and some of the sources that you find for yourself that this type of project, where you introduce an issue, talk about the causes and the impacts of an issue, and then talk about possible solutions, that framework is exactly the same kind of pattern that organizations use in real life. So the World Food Programme, the United Nations, World Trade Organization, etc., any sort of any commercial or governmental department will use this framework to explore issues and to create policies. So that's why we've chosen this framework for you guys, is to give you a real sense of how these issues play out in real time. So before I go any further, it's worth mentioning at this point that hopefully you can see my cursor move about at this point. Check the Teams folder, because I've copied over there a Word document with the specification, so the OCR specification for this topic in there. And you can see that for each section of your research project, we've linked it to areas of the specification. So the overview is going to link to section 1A of the specification. Now you're going to need to look at that document to find out in a bit more detail what 1A actually is, because they are broken down into sort of different into more specific I don't know how to say, more specific sort of areas, if you like. Originally they were written here, but it just meant that the instructions were way too long. So cross-reference these instructions with that document on Teams for a really good understanding of exactly how this links to the curriculum, and exactly why this project will be important for getting you a good grade for your A level. So you will need to create 2 reports, one for each country. So one for the United Kingdom and another one for a sub-Saharan African nation. And we've given you these choices here. So Niger, Mali, Chad, or Sudan. Hopefully you'll be able to relate the UK and any one of those countries to stuff that we've been going over the last few weeks, whether that's food deserts or desertification, globalization of the food industry, or so on. These countries should really allow you to explore all of those topics that we've covered, or if not all of them, then definitely most of them. Keep the reports separate, so you're not doing a comparison or anything. We don't mind if you do one document for the UK and another document for your EDC country, or whether you want to do them on the same document but just keep the reports completely separate, so that there's no sort of contamination from one going into the other. This piece of work will be due on the 31st of May. So Sunday the 31st of May is when you need to have submitted it by. And we really recommend sort of spreading the workload so you're not sort of rushing it towards the end of next week. So do a bit of work each day to spread the load. I would say that by the end of this week, you should be ready to start writing your project next week. So get all of your research done this week if you can, and then you're ready to begin writing your project next week. Organize your research so it's not just all in your head or on random bits of paper or documents. Organize your research before you start writing the project. Save your bookmarks, and sort of plan your project according to these headings, these numbered headings that we've got in this document here. So you're giving yourself the best possible opportunity to do really well in this project. And before I go on to the overview, there was one more thing I wanted to say. Yep, that was it. So use the, you can see that this document is sort of framed with sort of a section and then sort of questions within that section. Now, these questions are not for you to go through individually and answer each question. They are more for sort of guidance onto the kind of questions you want to be asking and the kind of questions you need to be looking into to really get the most out of this project. So they're not there for you to sort of, go through and tick one question off and then move to the other. They're more to act as a framework or sort of examples of how you can begin to be thinking about this piece of work. So they're there to sort of steer and guide you to do the project, not to define the project. So the overview. So in this section, your overview of the food security issues, what you want to do is introduce the reader to the topic. Define any key terms that you're going to be using, sort of such as food security, food deserts, or whatever the key terms might be, desertification. Define them so you don't, so that they're at the beginning, and sort of a layperson reading this will have a really good understanding of what the key terms are. State the importance of the report. So why is this a country worth studying in relation to food security? And this is where you might want to give sort of important historical information about the country. So it's a brief history of its political stability, its economic status, current affairs, and so on. So the examples I've given there, sort of coronavirus pandemic or civil unrest, its history of how developed a country it is. All of these things play into the issue of food security. So you definitely want to give a brief context of the country before you go into the sort of nitty gritty of the food security issues. So within that, you might want to talk about how many people are affected. So the number of people are affected. Again, why this is such an important country to study, and maybe sort of where the issues are most prevalent. So you could introduce this data as a map or so on. Another thing you might want to talk about there, which I haven't, which has not been included into this document, is something to do with the sort of when was the last time this country faced serious food security issues. So for the UK, that might be the financial crash of 2008 and how that affected food security. So within this section, you might want to talk about when was the last time that the country faced serious food security issues. So moving on to the causes and impacts. So you definitely want to organize these into human and physical causes. So thinking about causes, definitely split them into human and physical. So human might be overcultivation, political stability or instability, land ownership, and physical might be things like extreme weather, climate, desertification, climate change, and so on. So you definitely want to split them up into human and physical. Now, you really want to also be ranking these from most significant. So talk about the most significant causes of any food security issues, and then relate that most important cause to other less important ones. So are they related? If not, and they're independent, then great. But really make it clear what are the most important causes and what are the lesser important causes. Try not to look for specific causes. So don't have a cause in your mind and then base your research around that, but rather follow the research, let the sources guide you into sort of discovering what the most important causes are, and then write about those. So you don't feel the need to write a significant amount about a cause that isn't really that important to the country. Use any terminology that you've been taught so far, terminology that can be found in the textbook or that you've discovered along the way. So talking about landscape systems, talking about types of food production methods, for example, extensive food production, commercial food production, subsistence food production, using terms such as arable land and so on. So you really want to be using as sort of showing off your understanding of geographical terminology sort of in this section and throughout the rest of your project as well. Sort of within causes, has globalization or technology had a role? Has consumer choice had a role in shaping any food security issues you find? So really be having a think about what are the driving factors that are causing this food security issues. Moving on to impacts. Again, you want to split up your impacts into environmental and then into human or people. And again, what are the most significant impacts? How many people are they affecting? Whether that's a number of people or certain classes or groups of people, rural or urban, who and what is being most affected. You can use the textbook as a basis for which topics to talk about. So if you're talking about physical impacts, you might want to be talking about salinization, biodiversity, water quality, changing landscapes. So use the topics in the textbook to sort of guide you in your research and your report writing. For people, that might be health, sort of health of people, economic stability, political stability, migration. So things that you've studied, try and use those as guidance for what to look for when you're doing your study. And so once you've really clearly laid out the causes and the impacts of the food security issues, you now need to start to think about the solutions. Now, this is a really, really important part of your project because it sort of brings together your knowledge and understanding of the food security issues. And this is where you create or adapt solutions to fit the food security issues that you have researched and that you have presented. So this is really the most important section of your project, the solution aspect, the decision making. What solutions do you propose and why? So search any approaches that you've studied and which of these are most appropriate for the country that you're reporting about, whether that's the UK or one of the sub-Saharan African countries. So really have a look at all the approaches you've studied and select ones that are most appropriate, whether those are small scale, large scale, or a mixture of both. Have a think about who are the stakeholders in the solution. So is that farmers? Is that government? Are these trade organizations? And how are each of those different groups of stakeholders represented in your solution? So, for example, are farmers going to play a role in the solution? If so, then what role do they have? And how are they going to properly fulfill their role? So is it going to be a mixture of education for farmers and then providing them with sort of resources and technology and knowledge to implement any solutions that you think of? And then how is it going to be progress? How is progress going to be monitored overall? So have a real think about what type of a solution is most appropriate, who are the stakeholders in that solution, and how are they going to be best equipped to implement the solution that you've come up with. Check the sources. So there are some sources in the source list which are to do with solutions, and you might come across other ones. But check sources for current solutions that are real world examples of ones that are being applied now or in the past, and adapt them. By all means, take from them and adapt them and tailor them to the UK or your sub-Saharan African country. Now, another really important aspect of solution is to evaluate your own solution. So talk about what it's going to do well, but also talk about potential weaknesses that your solution might have. But if you are talking about weaknesses, then you need to state overall why those weaknesses are worth having, and how they are outweighed by the positives, and why overall it is an effective solution to implement. Now, this area is going to be quite difficult because there's not going to be one right approach. There's no right or wrong answer for this. It's more about how you critically and honestly assess your proposal for a solution, and then how you justify why that solution is uh, the best or the best course of action to take. So the solution, the decision making, the justification, and the assessment of your solution are really, really important aspects of this project. So moving on to sort of the future, so the future of food security in your country, how do you expect the situation to play out? So if your solution is followed, how do you expect the situation to look like in 5 years compared to if the situation was left unaddressed? Now, this is where you might want to sort of define success criteria. So how will you know if your solution has been successful or not? How will it be measured? Will it be measured by looking at food prices and how they've changed to be more accessible for people on the lower socio sort of economic scale, or will it be measured by environmental health? So really, how will you know that your solution has been successful? What else did I want to say about that? Oh yeah, that was it. Sort of again, how your solution, which I've written about here, how will your solution affect other aspects of the sort of global or national society? So is it only going to affect food security, or is it also going to have knock-on effects in other areas? Now, when it comes to sources for your project, I've got a bit of advice here, and I hope this you'll find this useful. But it's that if you're getting your factual evidence from official organizations, so the Food and Agriculture Organization, or the United States Department of Agriculture, or the Food Security Index.com, if you're getting your information from these sources, then you can pretty much rely on them to be accurate, up to date, and fairly non-biased. They're collecting information and they're presenting it. However, if you're getting your information from a news outlet, so someone like The Guardian, for example, be aware that they will perhaps sensationalize topics and sensationalize arguments, so blow them up out of proportion or make them seem worse than they are, or they might just have a general agenda. Some news outlets are against particular political parties, they're against particular countries because they have a sort of a bias against them. So an example of that might be, if you're getting information from the BBC, that's going to be a very, very different take on a situation compared to one that you would get from Russia Today or Al Jazeera. They might be talking about the same facts, the same situations, but they will have a very different spin on the story, or they may have a very different spin on the story. So that's something for you to think about when you're going through and you're doing your research. What's not included in this document at the moment is a UK government website, so www.gov.uk. And on the UK government website, you can go to different departments, and the Department of Environmental and Rural Affairs will be a really useful one for you to get information from. Also, websites such as the EU. So the EU would be a really good source of information on the UK, or maybe the African Union. So that's African Union would be a really good source of information for sub-Saharan Africa. And the last thing I want to say is keep a list or a bookmark folder of all the sources that you use and get your information from, just to make it easier for yourself, going back and checking your research, or if you remember something that you want, going back and finding that information. So keep a list or a bookmark folder of all of your sources. And if you want to be extra technical in your research project, then include a bibliography at the end. So include a list of all the sources that you've used. I appreciate it's been quite a long explanation of the topic there, so just gone over the 20-minute mark. Hopefully you found that breakdown useful. If you have any further questions, as always, myself and Mr. Davidson are here to help by email. So I'm going to leave it there so I don't drone on for any longer, and I wish you guys good luck in your project. Thank you.